So, three topics I want to cover with you is why if you're a customer, do you care about smart accounts? If you're a partner, why do you care about smart accounts? And lastly, what are you going to do about it, right? What you've got all of this account, you got the data within the accounts. What are you going to do with that information, and how can you use it to your best advantage? And so we'll start out with you, the customer, and why, as a customer, you would care. If I take you back a little bit on a walk through history, I started with Cisco quite a number of years ago as a developer, worked in routing, switching, did a few different jobs. But relative to this webinar, I went to work within the IT organization when Ben Strickland and some other developers were basically beginning to roll out the concept of smart accounts. And at the time, Cisco was dealing with some complaints from partners and customers around licensing. I think at the time there were about 29 different ways that you could license Cisco products. And it was one of the key customer satisfaction issues for Cisco. So as the team began looking at it, what they did is they took a look at where the industry was going. And we found that at the time, the International Standards Organization was beginning to tackle this concept of asset management. And within asset management, asset lifecycle management, or ALM. And within there, they began digging into it, and they kind of started carving the problem up. Now, you'll find standards bodies that are working toward kind of processes and techniques of managing. But at the time, one of the gaps was around the data, the telemetry, and how you went about automating asset management. And so some of the concepts around HAM, or hardware asset management, SAM, software asset management, RUM, reported usage management, these different concepts were being developed. And so Cisco adopted the International Standards Organization 19770 specification set to kind of evolve their licensing solution. And out of that licensing solution, Cisco then began doing smart accounts and smart licensing. And smart accounts now had the ability for devices to provide telemetry or data that would populate the smart account and then provide insights into software purchase and software consumption. The other thing it allowed Cisco to do was to be able to provide to the customers a view of their software license compliance. And while Cisco has traditionally not been very hard around enforcement of compliance, in fact, many products will just simply warn you if it's out of compliance, there are products that will actually enforce. There are products that will actually limit functionality, like prevent software upgrades or prevent configuration changes, or potentially, especially in the case of regulatory requirements around export control laws, will simply not allow that feature to work. So as the license became, Cisco began looking at more and more of what assets were possible for managing within the smart account construct. And so one of the things that you may be asking at this point is, well, what is an asset? Is it software? Is it hardware? What it is? And basically assets, there's nothing magical about them. They're just something of value. An asset can be a chair in your conference room. An asset can be the laptop that maybe you're watching this presentation on. These are tangible assets. These are physical things that you can touch, you can count. In the case of the networking world, you can walk through a data center and you can see the routers, you can see the switches, you can see the UCS boxes, right? And these are countable, measurable, right? Acquiring them is also a very transactional event, meaning that if I'm in the networking team and I need a router, the router doesn't magically show up in my hands. I need to go get a quote on it. I need to provide the quote to my procurement team. My procurement team then needs to provide a PO. My partner then needs to fill the PO, go to Cisco through Commerce, purchase it, have it shipped, and then it shows up. Well, with intangible assets such as software licensing, right, it's less transactional in that way. And by that, I mean that if I'm in the networking team and I've got a router and I want to try out a new feature, I enter a configuration command. Simply typing that configuration command can result in an entitlement being sent up to Cisco, Cisco registering as a license in use. Now my account is either consuming a license potentially that I own, or my account is showing that I'm consuming a license that I don't own, which means I'm now out of compliance. And so as you begin looking at your assets and think about what's tangible and what's intangible and the differences between acquiring those. There was a case I worked with, again, when I was at Cisco. There's a large stock exchange in South America, and I was talking to one of the individuals there, and they were expressing a concern. And the concern that they were expressing is that their account was going out of compliance. They happened to be in their asset management team, and they would see their account go out of compliance, and then they would have to scramble to create a purchase order to acquire that license. It turned out that the networking team was turning on features. In some cases, they were turning them on to try them out. In some cases, they were turning them to use. So that resulted in a bit of a change in operation and a change in the way that the customer had to do business, right? Because again, it's not about that tangible asset that you initiate a purchasing process to acquire. It's about simply doing an action that results in a consumption that can then drive. The other thing when you're thinking about assets is don't think just in terms of I have a physical box and I have a piece of software. There are other assets that you have. Your licensing agreements, right, will lead to things like software upgrades. They will lead to things like feature capabilities, contract management, your EA, for example, if you have an enterprise agreement, that is a form of an asset, right, and that you can then manage. If you begin looking at why the International Standards Organization and why companies like Cisco began looking at this, part of it is just really around where the S&P 500 is going. It's around how Wall Street is looking for companies for generating revenue. Historically, you would buy a box, you would pay like $5,000 for the software, you'd get the box, you were good to go. But as times have evolved, especially around the new compute models, especially as a service type stuff, right? If you're looking at any of the compute offerings that are out there, a lot of these are all software based, right? And so what you're seeing is, as of about 2020, I believe, if you look at the S&P 500, most of the companies in the S&P 500, up to 90% of their assets was in software, whether it was the word processor or the email program you're using, whether it was a virtualized router, whether it was a compute environment. These all represented assets that were all intangible, right? That they were all part of your growth. And so as you look over the next 12 to 18 months, you need to begin thinking about, if you're not already there, what is your expansion period going to look like? How are you going to evolve your business as it goes from predominantly a tangible hardware-based asset to an intangible software-based asset? And then begin thinking about, okay, great, I've got this, I've got my smart account, I now have my consumption, I now have my visibility into it. What am I going to do with that data? How's that data going to be useful for me? What insights can I get from that data? And these are all things to not just think of the smart account as, oh, hey, I log in here and I've got some license sitting in here, right? But begin thinking about how that information will provide insights to you. The other thing to think about in terms of the smart account is the promise of the smart account, right? When it was originally being built at Cisco, right, we wanted to basically give that insight to you, to give that data so that you could then apply that data to your business models. So part of the smart account was to offer you, right, increased self-management. You're managing the license. You're controlling where the license are within your account. You can group the license in ways that meaningful to you in the form of a virtual account. You can also control who has access to that information, right? So not only within your company, but what teams can create tokens to register products to consume those licenses, but also you can limit that token in terms of how many of the license can be consumed. You can also add partners to your account to give partners visibility to all or part of your account. And in terms of who you give visibility is entirely up to the customer, right? You, the customer. And so as you give the partners there should be value. They should be giving you something back in value for helping with that, right? Maybe it's in terms of helping expedite purchase orders, or maybe it's in the form of helping educate or train on, the different software upgrade models and processes. Maybe, with Cisco's PX and CX coming out, maybe it's in management of products that are part of your CX reports or part of your PX reports. Also in terms of features and utilization, right? Getting that information back. And then again, using that to predict budgeting and predict other business transactions that you're going to need to do.